Sarah Martinez looked at the clock on the wall of the small music room. It was almost 4 in the afternoon. Soon, her last student of the day would arrive. She sat at the old piano and ran her fingers over the worn keys. This piano had been her friend for 15 years. The Riverside Community Center was not a fancy place. The walls were painted a simple white color. There were cracks in some places. The carpet was old and had coffee stains on it. But Sarah loved this place. It was her safe space. It was where she could teach children to love music without anyone asking her to perform. She heard small footsteps in the hallway. Emma, her youngest student, was coming for her lesson. Emma was only 7 years old. She had curly red hair and always wore bright-colored clothes. Today, she wore a yellow dress with small flowers on it. "Miss Sarah," Emma called out as she ran into the room. Her mother followed behind her, carrying Emma's music books. "Hello, Emma," Sarah said, with a warm smile. "Are you ready to practice your scales today?" Emma made a face. "Scales are boring. Can we play the song about the butterfly instead?" Sarah laughed. This was typical Emma. She always wanted to skip the basic exercises and jump to the fun songs. "We need to do scales first. They make your fingers strong. Strong fingers can play beautiful butterfly songs." Emma's mother smiled at Sarah. "Thank you for being so patient with her. She talks about piano lessons all week." After Emma's mother left, Sarah sat next to the little girl on the piano bench. "Put your hands on the keys like I showed you. Remember, your fingers are like little dancers." Emma placed her small hands on the keys. Her fingers were still learning where to go. Sarah gently moved Emma's thumb to the right position. "There you go. Now play C, D, E, F, G." As Emma played the simple scale, Sarah remembered when she first learned to play. She was even younger than Emma. Her own teacher, Mrs. Chen, had been strict but kind. Mrs. Chen had big dreams for Sarah. She said Sarah had a gift. She said Sarah could play in big concert halls one day. Those dreams felt like they belonged to someone else now, someone braver, someone who didn't shake when people watched her play. "Miss Sarah, you're not listening," Emma said, bringing Sarah back to the present moment. "I'm sorry, sweetie. You played that perfectly. Now, let's try it with your left hand." The lesson continued for 30 minutes. Emma learned a new finger position and played a simple song about a cat. When her mother came back to pick her up, Emma was excited to show off what she had learned. "Look, Mommy, I can play the cat song." Emma played the melody with one finger. It was simple, but she played it with such joy that it sounded beautiful. After Emma left, Sarah sat alone in the quiet room. This was her favorite time of day. The building was peaceful. Most people had gone home. She could hear the janitor cleaning floors in the distance. The late afternoon sun came through the small window and made patterns on the wall. Sarah opened her own music book. It was filled with pieces she used to play years ago. Complex pieces by famous composers. Pieces that required years of practice to master. Her fingers still remembered some of them. Sometimes, when she was sure no one was around, she would play parts of these old songs. She found the page with Chopin's Baladno. 1. This piece had been her favorite. Once, she had practiced it for months in college. She was supposed to perform it at her senior recital. It was going to be her big moment. The moment that would launch her career as a professional pianist. But that moment never came. Instead, it became the worst day of her life. Sarah quickly closed the book. She didn't like to think about that day. It was better to focus on her students. They needed her to be strong and confident. They needed her to believe in them, even if she couldn't believe in herself anymore. She heard voices in the hallway. Marcus was arriving for his lesson. Marcus was 12 years old and her most talented student. He had been playing piano for 3 years, but he learned faster than students who had been playing for 6 years. Marcus lived with his grandmother because his parents had died in a car accident when he was 8. His grandmother worked 2 jobs to support them. She couldn't afford expensive lessons, so Sarah taught Marcus for half her normal price. She told his grandmother it was because Marcus helped her clean the music room after lessons. Really, it was because she saw something special in him. "Hi, Miss Sarah," Marcus said as he entered the room. He was tall for his age and always seemed serious. But when he played piano, his whole face would light up. "Hello, Marcus. How was school today?" "It was okay. I practiced the piece you gave me. I think I got the hard part figured out." Marcus sat at the piano and began to play. The music he made was incredible for someone his age. His fingers moved with confidence across the keys. He understood the emotions in the music, not just the notes. As Sarah listened to Marcus play, she felt proud and sad at the same time. Proud because he was so talented, sad because she remembered when she used to play with that same passion. "That was excellent, Marcus," she said when he finished. "You've been working hard." "My grandmother says I sound like you when you were young," Marcus said. "She heard you play once at a school concert 5 years ago. She said you were amazing." Sarah felt her cheeks get warm. She had forgotten about that small concert. It was just for parents and teachers. She had played one simple piece. Nothing fancy. "Your grandmother is very kind," Sarah said, "but you're the one with the real talent. Have you thought about entering the youth competition next month?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "I don't know. What if I mess up? What if people laugh at me?" Sarah's heart hurt when she heard this. She knew exactly how Marcus felt. The fear of failing in front of people. The worry that you're not good enough. "Marcus, look at me," she said gently. "Everyone gets nervous. Even the best musicians in the world get nervous. But you can't let fear stop you from sharing your gift." She was giving him advice. She couldn't follow herself. She was telling him to be brave when she had been hiding from her own fears for 15 years. "Will you help me practice for it?" Marcus asked. "Of course I will. We'll practice until you feel ready." After Marcus left, Sarah locked up the music room and walked to her car. The parking lot was almost empty. The sun was setting, and the sky was turning pink and orange. As she drove home to her small apartment, Sarah thought about her students. Emma with her bright smile and endless energy. Marcus with his serious face and incredible talent. All the other children she taught throughout the week. They trusted her to guide them. They looked up to her. But what would they think if they knew the truth? What would they think if they knew their confident teacher was actually afraid of her own shadow? What would they think if they knew she hadn't performed for an audience in 15 years? Sarah pulled into her driveway and sat in her car for a moment. Her apartment was quiet and lonely. She had her piano, her books, and her cat named Melody. It was a simple life, a safe life. But sometimes, late at night, she wondered what would have happened if she had been braver. What would have happened if she hadn't let one bad day destroy all her dreams? She shook her head and got out of the car. There was no point in thinking about the past. Her life was good now. She was helping children discover the joy of music. That was enough, or at least, that's what she told herself every day. Sarah was drinking her morning coffee when her phone rang. It was Tuesday morning, and she didn't have classes until the afternoon. She liked her quiet mornings. She would read, practice piano softly, and feed Melody, her orange cat. "Hello?" she answered. "Sarah, thank goodness you picked up." It was David Chen, the director of the Riverside Community Center. He sounded worried and out of breath. "David, what's wrong? You sound upset." "We have a big problem." "A really big problem." David paused, and Sarah could hear him breathing heavily. "It's about the spring recital this Saturday." Sarah's stomach dropped. The spring recital was the biggest event of the year. All her students had been practicing for months. Their families were coming. Some grandparents were flying in from other states just to watch their grandchildren play piano. "What happened?" Sarah asked, though she was afraid to hear the answer. "Jonathan Mitchell called me this morning. His father had a heart attack last night. He's flying to Denver right now to be with his family." Jonathan Mitchell was the guest pianist who was supposed to close the recital. He was a professional musician who had studied at famous schools. Parents were excited to hear him play. The local newspaper was even going to write a story about the event. "Oh no," Sarah said. "Is his father going to be okay?" "I don't know." Jonathan was crying on the phone. "He said he doesn't know when he'll be back. Maybe weeks." Sarah felt terrible for Jonathan and his family, but she also felt scared about what this meant for the recital. "Can we find another pianist?" she asked. "Maybe someone from the college? I tried calling everyone I know. It's too short notice. The college students are all taking final exams. The other professional musicians in town are already booked for weekend events. Sarah sat down at her kitchen table. Melody jumped onto her lap, sensing that something was wrong. So what do we do? She asked, though she was afraid she already knew what David was going to say. Sarah, you're the only one who can do this. You're the only pianist I know who has the skill to perform at that level. David, no, I can't. You know I don't perform anymore. But this is different. This is for the kids. Emma has been talking about this recital for weeks. Marcus has been practicing that difficult piece you gave him. All the students are so excited. Sarah's hands started to shake. Just the thought of sitting at a piano in front of a crowd made her feel sick. I teach, David. I don't perform. There's a big difference. Sarah, I've heard you play. When you think no one is listening, I've walked by the music room and heard. You're incredible. You're better than Jonathan, if you want to know the truth. This wasn't helping. Sarah felt her breathing getting faster. That's different. That's just me alone in a room. This would be in front of hundreds of people. I know you're scared. But think about your students. Think about Emma. Think about Marcus. They've worked so hard. Sarah closed her eyes. She could picture Emma's excited face when she talked about wearing her new dress to the recital. She could see Marcus practicing the same passage over and over until he got it perfect. I need to think about it, she said finally. Sarah, I need an answer today. If you can't do it, I have to cancel the whole thing. I have to call all the parents and tell them their children won't get to perform. After Sarah hung up the phone, she sat in her kitchen for a long time. Melody purred on her lap, but Sarah barely noticed. Her mind was spinning with worry and fear. She thought about the last time she had performed in public. It was 15 years ago at her college. She was 21 years old and full of confidence. She had practiced Chopin's Ballade No. 1 for months. She knew every note perfectly, but when she walked onto the stage that night, something went wrong. The light seemed too bright. The audience seemed too big. Her hands started to sweat, and her heart began to race. She sat at the piano and put her fingers on the keys. For a moment, everything was quiet. Then she began to play. But after only a few measures, her mind went blank. She couldn't remember what came next. Her fingers froze on the keys. The silence in the concert hall was terrible. She could hear people whispering. Someone coughed. A chair squeaked. She tried to start again, but the same thing happened. Her memory was gone. All those months of practice, and she couldn't remember a single note. Finally, she stood up from the piano bench and walked off stage. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She just left. She could hear the audience murmuring as she disappeared behind the curtain. That night changed everything. Sarah decided she would never perform again. She would teach instead. Teaching was safe. Teaching meant she could share her love of music without risking that kind of humiliation again. Sarah shook her head, trying to push away the memory. She got up from the table and walked to her piano. It was a small upright piano that fit perfectly in her living room. She had bought it used when she first moved to this apartment. She sat down and played a few scales to warm up her fingers. Then, without really thinking about it, she started playing Chopin's Ballade No. 1, the same piece that had defeated her all those years ago. Her fingers remembered every note. The melody flowed naturally from her hands. She had actually gotten better over the years. Teaching had made her understand music more deeply. She could hear things in the piece now that she had missed when she was younger. When she finished playing, she realized she was crying. The music was so beautiful, and she had played it perfectly, but the idea of playing it in front of people still terrified her. Her phone rang again. This time it was Marcus. Miss Sarah, my grandmother said I should call you. She heard that the man who was supposed to play at our recital can't come. Yes, Marcus. That's right. Does that mean the recital is canceled? Because I've been practicing really hard, and Emma's been so excited about her new dress. Sarah could hear the disappointment in his voice. This recital meant everything to him. It was his chance to show his grandmother how much he had learned. It was his chance to make her proud. I don't know yet, Marcus. Mr. Chen is trying to figure something out. My grandmother says you could play instead. She says you're the best pianist she's ever heard. Your grandmother is very kind, but Miss Sarah, you always tell me that I shouldn't let fear stop me from sharing my gift. You said that when I was scared about the youth competition, remember? Sarah remembered. She had given Marcus that advice just a few days ago. Now, he was giving it back to her. That's different, Marcus. You're young and talented. You have your whole future ahead of you. But you're talented too. And you're not old. You're only like 30-something. Despite everything, Sarah smiled. Marcus always knew how to make her feel better. After she hung up with Marcus, Sarah walked around her apartment. She looked at the photos on her walls. Most of them were pictures of her students at various recitals and competitions over the years. Emma grinning after her first solo performance. Marcus shaking hands with the judge at a piano competition. Dozens of other children who had learned to love music in her classroom. She stopped at one particular photo. It was from last year's spring recital. All her students were standing together on the stage, holding flowers and smiling. They looked so proud and happy. Sarah realized that this recital wasn't really about her. It wasn't about her fear or her past failures. It was about these children who had worked so hard and dreamed of this moment. But could she really do it? Could she sit at a piano in front of hundreds of people and trust that her fingers would remember what to do? Could she risk having another breakdown, this time in front of her own students? Her phone rang for the third time that day. It was Emma's mother. Sarah, I heard about the problem with the recital. Emma doesn't know yet, but I'm so worried about disappointing her. She's been practicing her piece every day. She even picked out special shoes to wear. I know, Mrs. Johnson. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I heard that David asked you to perform. I want you to know that all the parents would be thrilled to hear you play. We all know how talented you are. I appreciate that, but I'm not sure I can do it. Sarah, can I tell you something? When Emma first started lessons with you, she was so shy. She barely spoke above a whisper, but you helped her find her confidence. You taught her that music is about expressing yourself, not about being perfect. Sarah felt tears in her eyes again. Now, Emma wants to be a piano teacher when she grows up, just like you. You've changed her life. You've changed all their lives. After Mrs. Johnson hung up, Sarah sat on her couch and put her head in her hands. Everyone was counting on her. Her students, their parents, the community center. But the fear was still there, as strong as ever. She looked at Melody, who was sleeping peacefully in a patch of sunlight. What should I do, Melody? She asked the cat. Melody opened one eye, looked at Sarah, and went back to sleep. Sarah knew she had to make a decision. David needed an answer today. She could say no, and the recital would be canceled. Dozens of children would be disappointed. Months of practice would be wasted. Or she could say yes, and risk facing her worst fear all over again. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. By Wednesday morning, news about the recital problem had spread through the small community like water through sand. Sarah discovered this when she stopped at Miller's grocery store to buy cat food and coffee. Sarah called out Mrs. Peterson from the checkout line. Mrs. Peterson was Emma's grandmother, and she always had something to say about everything. I heard about the terrible situation with your recital. Sarah tried to smile politely. Yes, it's unfortunate, but we're working on finding a solution. Well, certainly hope so. Emma has been practicing that little song of hers every single day. She even tries to play it on our old keyboard at home, though half the keys don't work properly. Other customers in the store began to turn and listen. Sarah felt her cheeks getting warm. She didn't like being the center of attention, especially when people were talking about the recital. My neighbor told me that you might perform instead, said Mr. Rodriguez, who was buying flowers for his wife. His grandson Tony was one of Sarah's students. That would be wonderful. Tony always talks about how amazing you are at piano. I don't know about that, Sarah said quickly. We're still looking at all our options. But Mrs. Peterson wasn't finished. Nonsense. You should absolutely play. My Emma comes home from lessons and tries to play like you. She puts her hands just so, and she tries to make her fingers move the way yours do. More people gathered around to listen. Sarah felt trapped between the grocery shelves and the growing crowd of interested neighbors. You know, said Mrs. Garcia, whose daughter Sophia took lessons on Thursday afternoons. Sophia told me that you sometimes play the most beautiful music when you think no one is listening. She heard you through the door once when she was early for her lesson. Sarah's heart started beating faster. She didn't realize her students could hear her when she played alone in the music room. That settles it, then, declared Mrs. Peterson, as if she was making an official announcement. Sarah should play at the recital. Our children deserve to see their teacher perform. Everyone in the small crowd nodded and murmured in agreement. Sarah felt like she couldn't breathe. She mumbled something about needing to get home and hurried out of the store. Leaving her coffee behind in her car, Sarah sat for a few minutes trying to calm down. Her hands were shaking again, just like they had when David first asked her to perform. If just talking about playing piano made her this nervous, how could she possibly perform in front of hundreds of people? When she got home, there were 3 messages on her answering machine. The first was from David, asking if she had made a decision yet. The second was from Marcus's grandmother, offering to help in any way she could. The third was from a parent she barely knew, saying how excited their child was about possibly hearing Sarah play. Sarah erased all the messages without writing them down. She tried to distract herself by grading some music theory worksheets her older students had completed. But she couldn't concentrate. Her mind kept wandering to Saturday night. In just 3 days, the community center auditorium would be filled with families expecting to hear beautiful music. Around noon, she heard a knock at her door. She looked through the window and saw Emma standing on her doorstep with her mother, Miss Sarah. Emma called out when the door opened. "Mommy said I could come visit you." Emma's mother looked apologetic. "I'm sorry to bother you at home, but..." Emma has been so worried about the recital. She heard some of the older kids talking, and she's afraid it might be canceled. Emma looked up at Sarah with big, worried eyes. "Miss Sarah, are you really going to play piano at our recital? Because if you do, it will be the best recital ever." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level. "What makes you think that, sweetie?" "Because you're the best piano player in the whole world. Sometimes when I'm waiting for my lesson, I listen to you play. Through the door, you play like the music is coming from your heart." Sarah felt her throat getting tight. "Emma, what if I made mistakes? What if I played wrong notes?" Emma looked confused by this question. "But Miss Sarah, you always tell me that mistakes are just chances to learn. You say that music isn't about being perfect. It's about sharing feelings." Out of the mouths of children, Sarah thought. She was giving her own advice back to her. "Please say you'll play," Emma continued. "I want to wear my new blue dress and show everyone how well I can play my cat song. But mostly, I want to hear you play something beautiful." After Emma and her mother left, Sarah sat at her piano again. She opened her book to Chopin's Ballade No. 1 and stared at the notes on the page. This piece had haunted her for 15 years. It represented everything she had lost and everything she was afraid to try again. But maybe it was time to face it. She began to play slowly, thinking about each note before she pressed the key. The melody was sad and beautiful at the same time. It told a story of love and loss, hope and fear. As she played, Sarah realized that she understood this piece much better now than she had in college. Back then, she had played it with technical skill, but without deep feeling. She had been young and eager to impress people with how fast and perfectly she could play. Now, after years of teaching and living and experiencing both joy and disappointment, she could hear the real emotions in the music. Her phone rang, interrupting her practice. It was Marcus. "Miss Sarah, I have an idea. What if we all played together at the recital? Like, all your students could play a song, and then you could play with us?" "That's a sweet idea, Marcus, but no, listen. We could play that easy piece you taught us last month, the one about the seasons, and you could play the fancy parts while we play the melody." Sarah thought about this. Playing with her students would be different from playing alone. She wouldn't be the only one on stage. If she made a mistake, maybe it wouldn't matter as much. And then Marcus continued, getting more excited. "After we play together, you could play something by yourself. Something really beautiful that shows everyone how amazing you are." "Marcus, I'm not amazing. I'm just a teacher who gets very nervous when people watch her play." "But Miss Sarah, You taught me that being nervous is okay. You said it means we care about doing well. You said the best musicians get nervous too. Again, Sarah was hearing her own words repeated back to her. She had spent years teaching her students to be brave, to take risks, to share their musical gifts even when they felt scared. Now, they were asking her to follow her own advice. That evening, Sarah called her old college friend Jennifer, who lived in another state. Jennifer was one of the few people who knew the whole story about what had happened at Sarah's senior recital. "Jen, I need to talk to someone. I'm in a difficult situation. What's going on? You sound stressed." Sarah explained about the recital and David's request for her to perform. She told Jennifer about all the pressure from parents and students. "So what's the problem?" Jennifer asked. "This sounds like a perfect opportunity. The problem is that I haven't performed in public for 15 years. What if the same thing happens again? What if I freeze up in front of everyone, including my own students?" Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "Sarah, can I ask you something? When you're teaching, do you ever make mistakes?" "Of course. Everyone makes mistakes. And what happens when you make a mistake in front of your students?" "Well, I usually just correct it and keep going. Sometimes I even use it as a teaching moment." "And do your students think less of you when you make mistakes?" "No, they understand that mistakes are part of learning." "So, why do you think it would be different if you made a mistake while performing?" Sarah didn't have a good answer for this question. "Sarah, you were 21 when that recital went wrong. You're 36 now. You've been teaching music for 15 years. You understand music and performance in ways you never did back then. But what if I forget the notes again?" "Then you stop, take a breath, and start over. Or you play something else. The world won't end." After talking to Jennifer, Sarah felt a little calmer, but still unsure. She decided to go for a walk around her neighborhood to clear her head. It was a beautiful spring evening. The trees were covered with new green leaves, and flowers were blooming in people's yards. As she walked, she passed the community center. The building was dark except for the security lights, but she could imagine it filled with families on Saturday night. She thought about all her students. Emma with her bright smile and endless enthusiasm. Marcus with his serious face and incredible talent. Sophia, who was shy, but played with such gentle feeling. Tony, who made up his own songs and always made her laugh. All the others who had learned to love music in her classroom. These children trusted her. They looked up to her. They believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. Maybe it was time to show them that their teacher could be brave too. When Sarah got home, she found Melody sitting by the phone as if she was waiting for something important to happen. "What do you think, Melody? Should I do it?" Melody meowed once and walked over to the piano bench, as if she was telling Sarah to sit down and practice. Sarah laughed despite her nervousness. Even her cat seemed to think she should perform. She sat at the piano and played through the Chopin piece one more time. Her fingers moved smoothly across the keys. The music filled her small apartment with beauty and emotion for the first time in 15 years. Sarah allowed herself to imagine playing this piece for an audience. Thursday morning came too quickly. Sarah had barely slept all night. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw herself sitting at the piano on Saturday evening with hundreds of people staring at her. Her heart would start racing, and she would wake up with sweaty palms. She had called David the night before and told him she would do it. The words had come out of her mouth before she could stop them. Now, in the cold light of morning, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. "I must be crazy," she said to Melody, who was eating breakfast by the kitchen window. "What was I thinking?" Melody looked up from her food bowl and meowed, as if to say, "You were thinking about your students." Sarah made herself a cup of coffee. With shaking hands, she had 2 days to prepare for the biggest performance of her life. 2 days to overcome 15 years of fear and self-doubt. She sat at her piano and opened the music book to Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The notes looked familiar, but now they also looked terrifying. Each black dot on the page represented a chance to make a mistake in front of everyone she cared about. Sarah started to play, but her fingers felt stiff and clumsy. Notes that had come easily yesterday now seemed impossible to reach. She stopped and tried again, but it was even worse the second time. This is exactly what I was afraid of, she said out loud. I'm already falling apart, and the recital is still 2 days away. She closed the piano and decided to go for a walk. Maybe some fresh air would help clear her mind. But as soon as she stepped outside, she ran into Mrs. Chen, her elderly neighbor, who lived in the apartment next door. Sarah, dear, Mrs. Chen called out. I heard the wonderful news about the recital. My grandson is so excited to hear you play. Sarah tried to smile. Your grandson? Yes, little Danny from down the street. He doesn't take lessons with you, but he's heard so much about you from the other children. He's been begging his parents to let him start piano lessons. This made Sarah feel even more nervous. Now, she wasn't just playing for her own students and their families. She was playing for the whole community, including children who might want to start taking music lessons because of what they heard on Saturday night. I'm sure you'll be wonderful, Mrs. Chen continued. I remember when I was young in China, my piano teacher told me that the secret to performing is to play for the music itself, not for the people listening. That's interesting advice, Sarah said, though she wasn't sure she understood what it meant. She said that if you love the music and trust the music, it will carry you through any performance. The audience can feel when you truly care about what you're playing. After Mrs. Chen went inside, Sarah continued her walk, but couldn't stop thinking about what the old woman had said. Play for the music itself. What did that mean? When Sarah got home, she found a small envelope that had been slipped under her door. Inside was a hand-drawn card from Emma. The front showed a stick figure sitting at a piano with musical notes floating around her head. Inside, Emma had written in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, Dear Miss Sarah, thank you for being brave. Love, Emma. Sarah felt tears in her eyes. Emma thought she was being brave, but Sarah felt anything but brave. She felt scared and unprepared and foolish for agreeing to perform. Her phone rang. It was Marcus. Miss Sarah, I wanted to call and tell you something important. What is it, Marcus? I talked to my grandmother about you playing at the recital. She told me something I never knew before. What did she tell you? She said that when she was young, she was afraid to do lots of things. She was afraid to come to America. She was afraid to learn English. She was afraid to get a job when my grandfather died. Sarah listened, wondering where the story was going. But she said that sometimes we have to do things that scare us because they're important. She said that's what makes us grow up and become stronger. Your grandmother sounds very wise. She also said that you playing at our recital is important not just for us kids, but for you too. She said maybe it's time for you to stop hiding your gift. After Marcus hung up, Sarah sat in her living room feeling more confused than ever. Everyone seemed to believe in her more than she believed in herself. Her students, their parents, her neighbors, they all seemed confident that she could do this. But Sarah knew something they didn't know. She knew how badly things could go wrong. She had lived through the embarrassment and shame of failing in front of an audience. She knew how it felt to disappoint people who believed in you. She decided to call her old piano teacher, Mrs. Chen, who had taught her when she was a child. Mrs. Chen was retired now and lived in a nursing home about an hour away. Maybe talking to her would help. Sarah, Mrs. Chen's voice was weaker than Sarah remembered, but still warm and loving. What a wonderful surprise to hear from you. How are you, dear? I'm okay, Mrs. Chen. Actually, calling because I need some advice. I'm supposed to perform at a recital on Saturday, and I'm terrified. Perform? How exciting. What are you going to play? Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The same piece I was supposed to play at my college recital. There was a long pause. Mrs. Chen remembered that recital and what had happened. Sarah, can I tell you something? I was always proud of you, after that difficult night in college. Proud? But I failed completely. I embarrassed myself and disappointed everyone. No, dear. You were brave enough to try. Most people never even attempt to perform at that level. And look what you've done since then. You've spent 15 years sharing your love of music with children. That's more important than any single performance. But what if I fail again? What if I freeze up like I did before? Then you'll learn that failing isn't the end of the world. You'll learn that people who love you will still love you even if you make mistakes. Sarah thought about this. Her students had seen her make mistakes in lessons many times, and they still loved and respected her. Mrs. Chen, do you think I can really do this? I think you can do anything you set your mind to, but more importantly, think you need to do this. You've been carrying that fear for 15 years. It's time to put it down. After talking to Mrs. Chen, Sarah felt a little better. She decided to try practicing again. This time, instead of thinking about all the people who would be watching her, she tried to focus on the music itself. She played the opening measures slowly, listening to each note as it filled her apartment. The melody was beautiful and sad, like a story being told through sound. She thought about what Mrs. Chen had said about playing for the music itself. As she continued playing, something started to change. Her fingers began to relax. The notes started flowing more naturally. She wasn't thinking about the audience or about making mistakes. She was just thinking about the story the music was trying to tell. When she finished the piece, she realized she had played it better than she had in days. Maybe the secret wasn't to stop being afraid. Maybe the secret was to care more about the music than about the fear. But then her doorbell rang, and the anxiety came rushing back. It was David from the community center, and he looked excited. Sarah, I'm so glad you agreed to do this. I just came from the auditorium, and everything looks perfect for Saturday night. The piano has been tuned, the lights are all working, and we've got chairs set up for over 200 people. 200 people. Sarah felt dizzy. I also talked to the reporter from the newspaper, David continued. She's really excited to write about the recital. She said she's especially interested in hearing you perform, since she's heard so much about your teaching over the years. A newspaper reporter. Sarah sat down heavily on her couch. David, I'm not sure I can do this. I'm getting more nervous, not less nervous. That's completely normal. All performers get nervous before big shows. But Sarah, you should see how excited the kids are. Marcus has been practicing extra every day. Emma's been telling everyone at school about her piano recital. They're all so proud that their teacher is going to perform with them. After David left, Sarah spent the rest of the day trying to practice, but her concentration was completely gone. Every time she sat at the piano, she thought about newspaper reporters and 200 people and all the ways things could go wrong. By evening, she was exhausted from worrying. She made herself a simple dinner, but could barely eat it. She tried to watch television, but nothing could hold her attention. Finally, she called Jennifer again. Jen, I think I made a huge mistake. I don't think I can go through with this. What's changed since yesterday? Yesterday, you seemed like you were warming up to the idea. Yesterday, I was thinking about my students and how much the recital means to them. Today, thinking about everything that could go wrong. Sarah, let me ask you something. What's the worst thing that could happen? Sarah thought about this. I could forget the music like I did in college. I could embarrass myself in front of everyone. I could disappoint my students. And if that happened, what would you do? I guess I would apologize and go home. And then what? And then, I would still be their teacher on Monday morning. I would still care about them, and they would still care about me. Exactly. You're not performing to prove that you're perfect. You're performing to share something beautiful with people you care about. If you make mistakes, you make mistakes. The world will keep turning. After talking to Jennifer, Sarah felt a little calmer. She sat at her piano one more time before bed. Saturday morning arrived with gray clouds and the threat of rain. Sarah woke up feeling like she had been hit by a truck. Her stomach was in knots, her hands were shaking, and she had a headache from not sleeping well. The recital was in 12 hours. She stumbled to the kitchen and tried to make coffee, but her hands were trembling so much that she spilled coffee grounds all over the counter. Melody watched from her perch on the windowsill, probably wondering why her usually calm human was acting so strange. This is crazy, Melody, Sarah said, cleaning up the mess. I should call David right now and tell him I can't do it. We could cancel the whole thing and reschedule for next month when we can find another pianist. But even as she said this, Sarah knew she couldn't cancel. It was too late. The students had been telling their families for days that their teacher was going to perform. Emma had picked out her special dress. Marcus had invited his grandmothers, friends from church. All the programs had already been printed with Sarah's name on them. She was trapped by her own promise. Sarah forced herself to eat a piece of toast, though it tasted like cardboard. Then she sat at her piano and tried to practice, but it was hopeless. Her fingers felt like they belonged to someone else. Notes that she had played perfectly just 2 days ago now sounded wrong and clumsy. The phone rang, making her jump. "Sarah, it's David. I just wanted to check in and see how you're feeling about tonight." "Honestly, I feel terrible. I don't think I can do this, David." "Sarah, listen to me. I've been working with performers for 20 years. Everyone gets nervous before a big show. Even the most famous musicians in the world get stage fright. But what if I forget the music? What if I freeze up like I did in college?" Then you take a deep breath and start again. Or you play something else. The audience isn't expecting perfection, Sarah. They're expecting heart. After David hung up, Sarah decided to take a hot shower, hoping it would help her relax. But as she stood under the warm water, her mind started racing with all the things that could go wrong. What if she tripped walking onto the stage? What if the piano bench was the wrong height? What if the lights were too bright? What if she couldn't remember how the piece started? What if her hand started shaking so badly that she couldn't play at all? By the time she got out of the shower, Sarah was more anxious than ever. She tried to distract herself by cleaning her apartment, but she couldn't concentrate on anything. She started washing dishes and forgot to turn off the water. She began reading a book and realized she had read the same page 5 times without understanding a single word. Around noon, there was a knock at her door. It was Marcus and his grandmother, Mrs. Williams. "Miss Sarah," Marcus said, "Grandma wanted to come talk to you before tonight." Mrs. Williams was a small, elegant woman in her 70s. She had raised Marcus by herself after his parents died, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Despite all her struggles, she always had a warm smile and a kind word for everyone. "Sarah, dear," Mrs. Williams said, "I hope you don't mind us stopping by. I wanted to tell you how grateful I am for everything you've done for Marcus." "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Williams. Marcus is a wonderful student." "No, let me finish. When Marcus first came to live with me, he was so sad and angry. He wouldn't talk to anyone. He wouldn't play with other children. I was worried about him." Sarah looked at Marcus, who was studying his shoes. "But then he started taking piano lessons with you, and everything changed. Music gave him a way to express his feelings. You gave him confidence and hope." Mrs. Williams reached out and took Sarah's hands in hers. "Tonight isn't just about a recital, dear. Tonight is about showing Marcus and all those other children that adults can be brave too. They need to see that their teacher, who they love and respect, is willing to face her fears. But what if I fail? What if I disappoint them?" "Sarah, do you think Marcus loves you less when he makes mistakes during his lessons?" "Of course not. Then why do you think he would love you less if you made mistakes tonight?" Children don't expect adults to be perfect. They just expect us to try our best. After Marcus and his grandmother left, Sarah felt a little better. She decided to go to the community center early to practice on the actual piano she would be using. For the recital, the building was buzzing with activity. David and several volunteers were setting up chairs in the auditorium. The piano had been moved to the center of the stage and polished until it gleamed under the lights. Sarah walked onto the stage and sat at the piano bench. The auditorium looked huge and empty. In a few hours, it would be filled with people, all of them watching her. She put her fingers on the keys and started to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1. The piano had a beautiful, rich sound that filled the entire space. For a moment, Sarah forgot about her nerves and just listened to the music. But then she made a mistake about halfway through the piece. It wasn't a big mistake, just one wrong note, but it was enough to break her concentration. She stopped playing and put her head in her hands. "That sounded beautiful," said a voice from the back of the auditorium. Sarah looked up and saw Emma walking down the aisle with her parents. Emma was carrying a small bouquet of flowers. "Emma, what are you doing here so early?" "Mommy said we could come watch you practice. I brought you these flowers to say thank you for being brave." Emma climbed onto the stage and handed Sarah the flowers. They were simple daisies from someone's garden, but they were the most beautiful flowers Sarah had ever received. Emma, I needed to tell you something. I might make mistakes tonight when I play. I might not sound as good as you think I will. Emma looked confused. So what? You always tell me that mistakes are just part of learning, and you always tell me that the most important thing is to play from my heart. Once again, Sarah was hearing her own teaching words reflected back to her. More family started arriving for the sound check and final rehearsal. Sarah watched from the wings as her students took turns practicing their pieces on the stage piano. Each child was nervous but excited. They made small mistakes here and there, but they kept going with smiles on their faces. Emma played her cat song with such joy that it made everyone in the auditorium smile. Marcus played his difficult piece with incredible skill and emotion. All the other students did their best, and their families applauded enthusiastically for each performance. As Sarah watched her students, she realized something important. They weren't performing to prove how perfect they were. They were performing to share something they loved with people they cared about. That's what music was supposed to be about. When the rehearsal was over, David called Sarah aside. "How are you feeling now?" he asked. "Still nervous," Sarah admitted, "but watching my students reminded me why we're doing this. It's not about me. It's about celebrating their hard work and sharing the joy of music." "That's exactly right. And, Sarah, I want you to know that no matter what happens tonight, I'm proud of you for being willing to try." Sarah went home to rest for a few hours before the evening performance. She tried to take a nap, but she was too anxious to sleep. Instead, she sat in her favorite chair and thought about all the people who had encouraged her over the past few days. Mrs. Chen had reminded her that failing wasn't the end of the world. Jennifer had helped her remember that she was much more experienced now than she had been in college. Marcus had shown her that being brave meant doing important things, even when you're scared. Emma had reminded her that music was about playing from the heart, not about being perfect. As the sun began to set, Sarah realized it was time to get ready. She chose a simple black dress and comfortable shoes. She didn't want to wear anything that would make her feel more nervous or self-conscious. Before leaving her apartment, she sat at her piano one last time. She played through the Chopin piece, slowly and carefully, focusing on the beauty of the melody rather than the technical challenges. When she finished, she looked at Melody, who was watching from the couch. "Wish me luck, Melody. I'm going to need it." Melody meowed once, as if to say, "You don't need luck. You just need to trust yourself." Sarah gathered her music and her purse and headed for the door. In 2 hours, she would be sitting on that stage, in front of 200 people, playing music that had defeated her 15 years ago. She still felt scared, but for the first time in days, she also felt something else: determination. She was going to do this, not because she was fearless, but because some things were more important than fear. Her students were counting on her, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop letting that one terrible night from her past control her future. The recital was about to begin. The community center auditorium was packed. Sarah peeked through the curtain and saw every seat filled with families, friends, and neighbors. Children sat in the front rows, their legs swinging with excitement. Grandparents held cameras and phones, ready to capture every moment. The local newspaper reporter sat in the third row, her notebook open and ready. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. Her hands were sweaty, and her mouth felt dry. This was exactly what she had been afraid of: all these people, all these expectations, all these eyes that would soon be watching her every move. "Places, everyone," David called out backstage. "We're about to begin." The first part of the recital went beautifully. Sarah watched from the wings as her students performed their pieces. Little Emma walked onto the stage in her blue dress, curtsied to the audience, and played her cat song with perfect confidence. When she finished, the audience clapped so loudly that Emma giggled and curtsied again. Marcus was up next. He walked to the piano with serious concentration and sat down at the bench. His piece was much more difficult than the others, a complex composition that required both technical skill and emotional understanding. As he began to play, the auditorium fell completely silent. Sarah felt tears in her eyes as she listened. to Marcus perform. His playing was magnificent. Every note was perfect. But more than that, he was telling a story through the music. You could hear his struggles and his hopes in every phrase. When he finished, the audience erupted in applause. And Sarah saw Marcus smile for the first time all evening. One by one, all her students performed their pieces. Some made small mistakes, but they all kept going with confidence and joy. Sarah felt so proud of them she thought her heart might burst. Then David walked onto the stage to address the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of our student performances. As you know, we had planned to have a guest artist perform for you this evening, but unfortunately, he had a family emergency and couldn't be here. The audience murmured with disappointment. However, David continued, we are incredibly fortunate to have someone even better. Sarah Martinez has been teaching our children for 15 years. She has guided them, encouraged them, and helped them discover the joy of music. Tonight, she has agreed to perform for us. Please welcome Sarah Martinez. The applause was warm and enthusiastic, but Sarah felt frozen in place. This was it, the moment she had been dreading for days. She could still back out. She could say she was sick. She could run away and never face any of these people again. But then she saw Emma in the front row, clapping her hands with excitement. She saw Marcus giving her an encouraging smile. She saw parents and grandparents who had trusted her with their children's musical education. Sarah took a deep breath and walked onto the stage. The lights were bright, just as she remembered from her college recital. The audience was larger than any crowd she had ever faced. The piano looked enormous and intimidating in the center of the stage. But as Sarah walked to the microphone, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling more nervous, she felt a strange sense of calm. These weren't strangers judging her performance. These were her friends, her students, her community. They weren't here to criticize her. They were here to support her. Thank you, Sarah said into the microphone, her voice stronger than she expected. I have to admit, I'm very nervous right now. I haven't performed in public for 15 years. The audience laughed gently, and Sarah felt some of her tension ease. But watching my students perform tonight reminded me why I love music so much. It's not about playing every note perfectly. It's about sharing something beautiful with people you care about. Sarah walked to the piano and sat on the bench. She adjusted the height slightly and positioned her hands over the keys. The auditorium was completely quiet. Even the youngest children seemed to sense that something special was about to happen. I'm going to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1 for you, Sarah announced. This is a piece that has special meaning for me. It represents both my greatest fear and my greatest hope. Sarah looked out at the audience one more time. She saw Emma's bright, encouraging smile. She saw Marcus nodding at her with confidence. She saw David in the back, giving her a thumbs up. She saw faces filled with love and support, not judgment and criticism. For the first time in 15 years, Sarah felt ready to share her music with the world. She placed her fingers on the keys and began to play. The opening notes of the ballade flowed from the piano like water, soft and gentle at first, then growing stronger and more confident. Sarah's fingers remembered exactly where to go, exactly how much pressure to apply, exactly how to shape each phrase. But something was different. This time, when she had played this piece in college, she had been focused on impressing people with her technical skill. Tonight, she was focused on telling the story that lived inside the music. The melody sang out across the auditorium, and Sarah could feel the audience listening with complete attention. Children who had been fidgeting in their seats sat perfectly still. Adults leaned forward, drawn into the emotional world of the music. As Sarah played, she forgot about her fears. She forgot about the possibility of making mistakes. She forgot about the newspaper reporter and the 200 people watching her. All she could think about was the music itself, the way it rose and fell like breathing, the way it expressed feelings that couldn't be put into words. The piece moved through different sections, sometimes playful and light, sometimes deep and serious. Sarah's hands moved across the keys with growing confidence. She could feel 15 years of teaching and experience flowing through her fingers. This wasn't the same person who had struggled on stage all those years ago. This was a mature musician who understood both music and life in ways her younger self never could. About halfway through the piece, Sarah reached the section that had always been the most difficult for her. This was where she had made her mistake. During practice the other day, this was where her memory had failed her in college. For just a moment, Sarah felt a flutter of the old fear. But then she heard Emma's voice in her memory. "You always tell me that mistakes are just part of learning." She heard Marcus saying, "You taught me that being nervous is okay because it means we care." Sarah played through the difficult section with perfect clarity. Her fingers found every note exactly where it was supposed to be. The music flowed from her hands like it was the most natural thing in the world. As the piece built toward its climax, Sarah could feel the emotional power of the music filling the entire auditorium. This wasn't just a piano recital anymore. This was a moment of pure musical connection between the performer and the audience. The final section of the ballade was both triumphant and bittersweet. It spoke of dreams achieved and dreams lost, of struggles overcome and new challenges ahead. As Sarah played these final phrases, she realized she was telling not just Chopin's story, but her own story too. She was the young woman who had let fear stop her from pursuing her dreams. She was the teacher who had found new purpose in helping others discover music. She was the person who had finally found the courage to face her fears and share her gift with the world. As the last notes faded into silence, Sarah kept her hands on the keys for a moment, not wanting to break the spell. The auditorium was completely quiet. She could hear her own heartbeat and the soft sound of her breathing. Then, slowly, she lifted her hands from the piano and turned to face the audience. What she saw took her breath away. Every single person in the auditorium was on their feet, applauding with an enthusiasm she had never experienced before. But it wasn't just polite applause. People were cheering, shouting bravo, wiping tears from their eyes. Emma was jumping up and down in the front row, clapping her hands above her head. Marcus was applauding so hard his hands must have hurt. Parents and grandparents were beaming with pride, not just for their own children, but for the teacher who had inspired them. Sarah stood up from the piano bench and took a small bow. The applause grew even louder. She looked out at all these faces of people who had supported her, believed in her, and encouraged her to be brave. For the first time in 15 years, Sarah Martinez felt like a real musician again. Not because she had played every note perfectly, but because she had shared something beautiful and meaningful with people she cared about. As she walked off the stage, Sarah knew that everything had changed. The fear that had controlled her life for so long was finally gone, replaced by something much more powerful: the joy of making music and sharing it with others. The little girl who had dreamed of being a pianist was still alive inside her, and tonight, that little girl had finally come home. The standing ovation seemed to go on forever. Sarah stood at the side of the stage, overwhelmed by the response from the audience. She had expected polite applause, maybe a few encouraging smiles. She had never imagined anything like this. People weren't just clapping, they were wiping tears from their eyes. Mrs. Peterson, Emma's grandmother, was sobbing openly. Marcus's grandmother had her hands pressed to her heart, her face glowing with joy. Even the newspaper reporter had put down her notebook and was applauding enthusiastically. David appeared at Sarah's side, his own eyes wet with tears. "Sarah, that was incredible. In 20 years of organizing these recitals, I have never heard anything like that." Sarah felt dizzy. The adrenaline that had carried her through the performance was starting to fade, leaving her shaky and emotional. "Did I really do okay? I was so nervous I could barely think." "Okay," David laughed. "Sarah, you just gave one of the most beautiful performances I've ever witnessed. Look at these people." The audience was still on their feet, still applauding. Children were bouncing with excitement. Adults were turning to each other with amazed expressions, as if they couldn't believe what they had just heard. Finally, the applause began to die down, and people started to sit. But Sarah could see that something had changed in the room. There was an energy, an excitement that hadn't been there before. Her performance had touched something deep in everyone present, Emma broke away from her parents and ran up to the stage. Miss Sarah, that was the most beautiful thing I ever heard. Emma's mother followed, tears streaming down her face. Sarah, I don't have words. That was magical. More people began approaching the stage. Marcus pushed through the crowd, his serious face bright with pride. Miss Sarah, you were amazing. I want to learn to play like that someday. You already play better than I did at your age, Sarah said, kneeling down to Marcus's level. You have something special. Marcus, don't ever forget that. Mrs. Williams, Marcus's grandmother, peered behind him. She took Sarah's hands in hers, just as she had done earlier that day. Sarah, dear, what you did tonight, it wasn't just music, it was healing. You helped that boy see what's possible when we face our fears. Before Sarah could respond, more people surrounded her, parents she had known for years, neighbors from her apartment building, strangers who had come just to support the community center. Everyone wanted to shake her hand, to tell her how much her performance had meant to them. I had no idea you could play like that, said Mrs. Garcia, Sophia's mother. Sophia is going to be so inspired. She's been saying she wants to quit piano because it's too hard, but after hearing you tonight, I think she'll change her mind. An elderly man Sarah didn't recognize approached her with tears in his eyes. Miss, I haven't heard piano music like that since my late wife used to play for me. Thank you for bringing back such beautiful memories. The newspaper reporter finally made her way through the crowd. Miss Martinez, I'm Jennifer Walsh from the Tribune. Could I possibly speak with you for a few minutes? What you did tonight. This isn't just a story about a recital. This is a story about courage and community, and the power of music to heal. Sarah felt overwhelmed by all the attention. For 15 years, she had hidden from moments like this. Now she was experiencing something she had never dreamed possible, not just acceptance, but genuine appreciation and love from her community. David eventually helped her move to a quieter corner of the auditorium, but people kept approaching. Some wanted to tell her how her performance had affected them. Others wanted to know if she would consider giving private concerts or teaching master classes for advanced students. I never knew we had such an incredible talent right here in our community, said Mayor Johnson, who had attended with his family. Miss Martinez, would you consider performing at our Summer Arts Festival? We'd be honored to have you. Sarah looked at David in amazement. I can't believe this is happening. 3 hours ago I was terrified I would embarrass myself. Now, people are asking me to perform at other events? Sarah, you need to understand something, David said seriously. What happened tonight wasn't just a good performance. It was transformative. People felt something real, something honest. They connected with your music in a way that doesn't happen very often. As the crowd began to thin out, Sarah's students and their families started approaching for final goodbyes. Each interaction was emotional and meaningful. Sophia's family was among the last to leave. Sophia, who was usually shy and quiet, ran up to Sarah with bright eyes. Miss Sarah, after hearing you play tonight, I don't want to quit piano anymore. I want to keep learning, so maybe someday I can make people feel the way you made me feel. Sarah knelt down and hugged Sophia. Music is a journey, sweetie. Some days will be hard, and some days will be magical. But if you keep practicing and keep loving music, you'll create your own magical moments. Emma was the very last student to leave. She had fallen asleep in her father's arms during the reception, but she woke up when her family was ready to go. Miss Sarah, Emma said sleepily, will you play that beautiful song again at my next lesson? I don't think that piece is quite ready for your lesson book yet, Sarah laughed. But I'll play it for you sometime when you visit me, okay? Promise? I promise. After everyone had gone home, Sarah and David were left alone in the empty auditorium. The chairs were scattered, there were programs on the floor, and the stage still held the beautiful piano that had carried Sarah through her moment of triumph. How do you feel? David asked as they sat in the front row, looking up at the stage. Sarah thought about the question. How did she feel? Exhausted, certainly. Emotionally drained from months of worry and fear, but also free, lighter than she had felt in years. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 15 years, she said finally. And tonight, I finally let it out. What you did tonight took incredible courage. I hope you know that. I don't feel brave. I feel like I was terrified right up until the moment I started playing. Then something else took over. That's exactly what bravery is, David said. It's not the absence of fear. It's doing something important despite the fear. As they locked up the building and walked to their cars, David had one more thing to say. Sarah, I hope this is just the beginning for you. You have a gift that needs to be shared with the world. Tonight proved that. I don't know about the world, Sarah said, but maybe I'm ready to share it with our community. Maybe I'm ready to stop hiding. When Sarah got home to her apartment, she felt like she was seeing everything with new eyes. The piano that had been her refuge for 15 years now looked different. It wasn't just a place to hide anymore. It was an instrument for sharing joy and beauty with others. Melody greeted her at the door, meowing as if to ask how the evening had gone. It went well, Melody, Sarah said, picking up her cat and stroking her soft fur. Better than I ever imagined possible. She sat at her piano and played a few gentle notes. Her fingers felt different on the keys now. They felt confident and sure they belonged there. As she played a simple melody, Sarah thought about all the people who had supported her journey to this moment. Her students, who had believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. David, who had pushed her out of her comfort zone. Her old teacher, Mrs. Chen, who had reminded her that failing wasn't the end of the world. Jennifer, who had helped her see that she was stronger now than she had been in college. Most of all, she thought about the moment during her performance when her fear had simply melted away. She had been so focused on the music, so connected to the story she was telling, that everything else had disappeared. The audience, the lights, the possibility of making mistakes, none of it had mattered anymore. That was the moment Sarah realized she had found her way back to who she was meant to be. Not the frightened young woman who had run away from her dreams, but the mature artist who understood that music was about connection, not perfection. As she prepared for bed that night, Sarah looked at herself in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at her was the same, but something in her eyes had changed. There was a confidence there that hadn't been there that morning, a peace that had been missing for 15 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities. People would probably ask her to perform again. Students might want to study with her who had never been interested in piano before. Her quiet, safe life as a hidden teacher was probably over forever. But for the first time in 15 years, Sarah wasn't afraid of what came next. She was excited about it. She had faced her greatest fear and discovered that she was stronger than she had ever imagined. She had shared her gift with her community and watched it bring joy and healing to others. She had remembered why she had fallen in love with music in the first place. Most importantly, she had learned that the best performances don't come from technical perfection. They come from having the courage to open your heart and share your truth with others. As Sarah drifted off to sleep, she could still hear the echo of that standing ovation in her mind. But more than that, she could hear the sound of her own music, finally set free after being locked away for so long. The teacher had become the student had become the artist, and the artist had finally come home. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the same community center auditorium, but everything was different now. The room was packed again, but this time, it wasn't just for a student recital. It was for the first concert in what the local newspaper had started calling the Sarah Martinez Music Series. The idea had grown naturally from that magical night in spring. After her performance at the student recital, people kept asking when they could hear her play again. David had suggested making it a regular event, monthly concerts that would bring professional quality music to their small community. Sarah had been nervous about committing to regular performances, but she had learned something important that night in spring. Fear was just another emotion, and like all emotions, it could be acknowledged and then set aside in service of something more important. Tonight's concert was special because all her students were in the audience, along with their families and what seemed like half the town. But there were also faces Sarah didn't recognize, people who had driven from neighboring towns after hearing about the concerts from friends or reading about them in the newspaper. The local Tribune had written a feature story about Sarah 3 months ago. The headline read, "From Fear to Freedom. Local piano teacher inspires community through music." The article had been picked up by other newspapers in the region, and suddenly, people were talking about the remarkable piano teacher in the small town of Riverside. But the most important faces in the audience tonight were the familiar ones. Emma sat in the front row wearing a bright yellow dress, her legs swinging with excitement just like they had 6 months ago. She was 8 now and had progressed to much more difficult pieces. More importantly, she had started composing her own simple songs. Marcus sat with his grandmother, looking more confident and mature than ever. He had won first place in the regional youth piano competition just last month. But the biggest change in Marcus wasn't his playing, it was his smile. He smiled all the time now, something his grandmother said he hadn't done much since his parents died. All of Sarah's other students were scattered throughout the audience. Sophia, who had almost quit piano, was now one of Sarah's most dedicated students. She had even started helping teach the youngest beginners. Tony had discovered that he loved jazz music and was learning to improvise. The list went on, but the changes in her students weren't the only transformations Sarah had witnessed. The success of the concert series had brought new life to the community center. David had been able to start other programs, art classes, theater groups, book clubs. The building that had once felt empty and forgotten was now bustling with activity. "Ladies and gentlemen," David announced from the stage, "please welcome Sarah Martinez." The applause was warm and enthusiastic, but Sarah no longer felt the panic that had once accompanied such moments. She walked onto the stage wearing a beautiful blue dress that Emma had helped her pick out. Her hands were steady, her breathing was calm, and her heart was full of excitement rather than fear. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Sarah said into the microphone. 6 months ago, stood on the same stage terrified that I would embarrass myself in front of my students and their families. Tonight, I stand here grateful for the journey that fear led me on. The audience chuckled appreciatively. Sarah had learned to speak to audiences the same way she spoke to her students, with honesty and warmth. "I want to tell you about the program I've chosen for tonight. I'm going to play 3 pieces that have special meaning for me. The first is the Chopin Ballade that many of you heard me play at our spring recital. But tonight, I want to play it not as someone overcoming fear, but as someone celebrating the joy of making music." Sarah walked to the piano and sat down. The audience fell silent, but it was a different kind of silence than she had experienced in the past. This wasn't the silence of people holding their breath, worried about what might go wrong. This was the silence of people settling in to enjoy something beautiful. She began to play the Chopin Ballade, and immediately Sarah knew this performance was different from the one 6 months ago. That night, she had played with courage despite her fear. Tonight, she played with pure love for the music itself. The notes flowed from her fingers like a conversation with an old friend. She could hear depths in the music that she had never noticed before, subtleties that came from months of performing and growing as an artist. When she reached the section that had once terrified her, she played it with such confidence and beauty that several people in the audience gasped with pleasure. When the piece ended, the applause was immediate and heartfelt, but Sarah didn't pause to acknowledge it. She moved seamlessly into her second piece, a gentle, lyrical composition by Debussy that painted pictures of moonlight on water. As she played, Sarah could see her students listening with complete attention. This was why she had become a music teacher in the first place, not just to teach technique and theory, but to share the transformative power of music. Tonight, she was teaching them something that couldn't be learned from textbooks. She was showing them what it looked like to pursue your dreams, no matter how old you were or how long you had been afraid. The Debussy piece ended with the softest whisper of notes, and the audience remained perfectly quiet for several seconds, as if they didn't want to break the spell. "My final piece tonight," Sarah announced, "is something I've never performed in public before. It's a composition I wrote myself, dedicated to all the students who taught me that the best teachers are also students, and that the greatest gift we can give each other is the courage to be vulnerable." There was a murmur of excitement in the audience. None of them had known that Sarah composed her own music. Sarah had been working on this piece for 3 months. It was autobiographical in a way. It told the story of someone who had lost their way and found it again through the love and support of others. The melody wove together themes of fear and hope, sadness and joy, isolation and connection. As she played her own composition, Sarah felt a sense of completion that she had never experienced before. This wasn't just about overcoming stage fright or giving a good performance. This was about becoming the person she was meant to be, someone who created beauty and shared it generously with the world. The piece built to a climax that was both triumphant and tender, expressing the idea that our greatest victories often come not from conquering others, but from conquering ourselves. As the final notes faded away, Sarah kept her hands on the keys for a moment, feeling the weight and wonder of the moment. Then she turned to face the audience, and what she saw took her breath away all over again. Everyone was on their feet, but this standing ovation was different from the one 6 months ago. That night, people had been surprised and moved by an unexpected gift. Tonight, they were celebrating someone they had watched grow and change before their eyes. Emma was jumping up and down and clapping her hands above her head, just like she had that night in spring. But now, she was joined by dozens of other children, all of them inspired by their teacher's example of courage and perseverance. Marcus was applauding with tears streaming down his face. Later, he would tell Sarah that her composition had made him think about his parents and how proud they would be of the young man he was becoming. Mrs. Williams, Marcus's grandmother, was dabbing at her eyes with the tissue. She caught Sarah's eye and mouthed the words, "Thank you," across the crowded auditorium. Parents and grandparents were beaming with pride, not just for their own children's teacher, but for someone who had become a symbol of hope for the entire community. The newspaper reporter was scribbling furiously in her notebook, but Sarah could see that she too was moved by the performance. Mayor Johnson was in the audience again, and he had brought the city council with him. They had been discussing ways to expand the music program and possibly offer Sarah a position as the town's first arts director. But the most meaningful moment came when the applause finally died down and Sarah walked down from the stage. A little girl she had never met before tugged on her dress. "Miss," the child said in a shy voice, "my mommy says you used to be scared to play piano for people. Is that true?" Sarah knelt down to the child's level. "Yes, sweetie. I used to be very scared, but you're not scared anymore?" "Well, still get a little nervous sometimes. But I learned that doing something scary can be worth it if it makes other people happy." The little girl thought about this for a moment. "I want to learn to play piano like you. Will you teach me?" Sarah smiled and looked up at the child's mother, who was watching the interaction with tears in her eyes. "I would love to teach you," Sarah said to the little girl. "What's your name?" "Lucy. Lucy Chen." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. "Chen? Are you related to Mrs. Chen who used to live on Maple Street?" "That's my great-grandma," Lucy said excitedly. "She taught piano too, but she's really old now and her fingers don't work so good anymore." Sarah felt a circle completing itself. Mrs. Chen had been her first piano teacher, the one who had believed in her talent when she was just a child. Now, Mrs. Chen's great-granddaughter wanted to learn from Sarah. "Lucy," Sarah said, "I think your great-grandmother and I have a lot to talk about. Would you like to bring her to visit me sometime?"